I've got one final question for you, Sami. We're approaching the 3rd of March, 100 years since the demise of the Ottoman Caliphate, notwithstanding everything that you've said. And the very fact is that by 1924, the Ottoman Caliphate was a pale, shadow of its former self. So we know that, and we know that many reforms had been undertaken by that point. But symbolically, at least, the caliphate system collapsed on the 3rd of March 1924, and the Caliph was sent into exile. And that is a moment, a tremendous moment, a momentous moment in a negative sense for the Muslim Ummah. Everything we've talked about today, indicates a Muslim world in almost near collapse. A Muslim world that is being torn apart by external forces, by Zionism, by leaders who claim to be Muslim but who are working day and night against Islam. We know the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, "Innama al-imam al-junnah," that the imam is a junnah, a shield behind whom you fight and you defend yourselves. And the idea of caliphate is so intrinsic, I suppose, to Islamic history, if not Islamic text. There is a nostalgia, maybe more than a nostalgia, a cogent argument to suggest that unless you have a serious program to return back to this type of leadership, the Muslim Ummah is going to be subject to the horrid wars that ravage the Muslim world, the nefarious actors like the UAE that seek to divide and undermine our unity, and Zionism, of course, which has established its state and remains very prominent in the heart of the Muslim world. So I suppose I want you to tackle that point. How important is the caliphate to you and to your program? Notwithstanding, by the way, how easy or hard, I think it's difficult. I'm not in any way undermining the program. Is a very difficult program, but as an idea, how important is it to you? And secondly, I suppose, set out for me the next 100 years. I know that's very difficult. Your ideal, what should the next 100 years look like? So take those in turn, inshallah.
I think that one of the things that when you read about Muslim history is that caliphates came and collapsed. Nations came and collapsed. And one of the things that I used to always think about is, why is it that you have a caliphate, you have a masjid on every street, you have Ramadan full during Taraweeh, but Allah still destroys those nations, still they collapse, whether it's Andalusia or in Baghdad or these places or the like. And then you come across readings Ibn Khaldun, Al-Adlu Asasul Mulk, justice is the foundation of all dominion. And Ibn Taymiyyah, who says that Allah will preserve a kafir state that is just, but will destroy a Muslim state that is unjust. For Allah can tolerate kufr with justice, but will not tolerate Islam with injustice. When you read about the literature from Muslim history, you'll find that although modern literature focuses on the form of what the state looks like, the scholars of old focused on the substance of what the people were like. Because they argued that when the substance of the people was one in which they stood for justice and strove and kept moving, the form follows. And we tend to flip it on the other way. The reason why I say it is that if the form was what leads to the substance, the caliphate would not have fallen, because the caliphate would have protected that particular substance. And that's why I think that when Muhammad Asad says it's not Muslims that made Islam great, it's Islam that makes Muslims great, what he said was, and he elaborates on it, he says when Islam becomes a manual for action, that it inspires you to action, to stand for justice, to mobilize in your entrepreneurship, in your reading, in your engagements, in your interactions, in your purpose in life, the Muslims produced extraordinary things, amongst them a caliphate, amongst them nation states, amongst them in science and the like. But when Islam becomes a series of rituals, focusing on the forms, focusing on the rituals, focusing habits, and that putting that as the paramount importance, that's when Allah removes the glory of the ummah and relegates them to the humiliation that many people complain about today. And that's why I feel that when it comes to the 100 years, I always look at the Muslim ummah from a different perspective, in that the Ottoman Caliphate fell, like caliphates fell before it. But the reality is that the colonizing powers were unable to capitalize on it. Because when the Ottoman lost the control over North Africa, even though Ottomans no longer had control over Libya, like I gave the story of Ahmed Sanusi, he still obeyed the Sultan when he told him go and conquer, go and attack the British in Egypt. The reason being is that there was still an affinity for the idea of a unified Muslim leadership, and that affinity is still actually exists today. I think that what's absent is not an affinity for a united Muslim leadership, but rather an appreciation of the individual battles that each arm of the ummah is fighting. The reason why I say it is we were talking earlier about the travel and I was saying reconnecting the memories of the ummah. The question is always posed as if the Muslim Ummah is doing nothing in order to revive or re-establish a unified leadership. I actually argue no. I agree that the philosophers who talk about it are the ones who are doing nothing of substance or practice. In reality, the ones of practice are the ones who are not talking the loudest about it. Because when you go to Bosnia, for example, and you find that the Yugoslavian communist regime tried to wipe out Islam, shut down the Muslim associations, execute half their leaders, put the rest in hard labor, try to ban the printing of the Quran, then when the Yugoslavia falls apart, and Bosnia is established, the Serbians invade and they try to commit a genocide and still the Muslims hold on. All they have to do is give up La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah and then they will be able to live in comfort without the persecution. Mladic said, you are our people, but we don't like the fact you have Islam and that you're Muslims. Abandon it and come back to what we were about. That's all they needed to do, but they refused to give it up. Why? Because they believed this was the way to keep the hope alive for a unified Muslim leadership. That's what Izzat Begovic spoke about in his book when he talks about what does it mean to be part of an ummah? What does it mean to be a Muslim nation? What does it mean to be... We always look, people talk about Bosnia, for example, they say, yeah, but he talked about coexistence between Jews and the Christians. But when you look at the Muslim Ummah caliphates, they were all about coexistence between the Christians and the Jews. That's where the Jews found their haven. Think about it. Prophet ﷺ enters Medina and gives them the Medina constitution, which says to the Jews, anyone who oppresses you, we will fight against them. Umar al-Khattab enters Jerusalem, the Romans have kicked out the Jews. Umar al-Khattab brings them back. The Crusaders take Jerusalem, they kick the Jews out. Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi brings them back. Isabella kicks the Jews out to Spain. It's the Ottomans who send the ships to bring the Jews back. You look after the Holocaust, where do they flee? They go to Palestine, to the Muslim lands, and they unfurl the banners and they say, please don't do to us what the Europeans did to us. The reason why I say all of this is, I think that it's less to do with what can we do to establish a unified Muslim leadership and more about understanding what are the other limbs of the ummah doing. I always argue that one of the greatest tragedies of colonization was not actually just the physical part. It's the mental part, it's the psychological part that tore the limbs from each other, whereby the Muslim of old could talk about the politics of Morocco all the way to Jakarta. The Muslim today can barely talk about the politics within their own border because they haven't reconnected with those memories. I always tell people that when you go to countries like Uzbekistan, Bosnia, Turkey, Malaysia, Ghana, Nigeria, you should go as a cup that is going to be filled with the memories of that ummah, where you sit with them and you suddenly discover that the ummah has never actually laid down and accepted defeat. The ummah kept pushing. The literature in Sokoto, in northern Nigeria, for example, that hardcore Muslim identity where they're very proud of it and they uphold it, and where there's still such a dominant force, or in Mali or in Senegal, now on TikTok, all these Senegal Qur'an are going viral in terms of upholding traditions of the Quran and the Hadith. The ummah never actually laid down and accepted it. And that's why I argue that when we talk about unified Muslim leadership, people always talk about it from the concept that the Muslims have been defeated. But I always argue that the Muslims have continued resisting because when the Ottoman Caliphate collapsed, the Italians couldn't stay in Libya, they were kicked out. The French couldn't stay in Algeria, they were kicked out. The British couldn't stay in Egypt, they were kicked out. In other words, they couldn't capitalize on the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And when these people emerged from their victories, they looked at each other and said, how can we reunite the Ummah once more? Tunisia and Libya united for 24 hours in 1974. Egypt, Syria and Iraq tried to unite for 6 months and then it eventually fell apart. I'm not saying that these attempts were wonderful. I'm saying that look at the intention of those who kicked out the colonizers. Their aim was never the nation state. They saw the nation state as the transition to re-establish the unified leadership. And that's why I argue that the problem with the debate when people have about unified leadership is they deride the past without appreciating who these people were who established the status quo. My grandfather fought in Algeria. He fought to kick out the French. My father didn't fight for a nation. My grandfather didn't fight for a nation state. He fought for the integrity and honor of the ummah and believed that his efforts were the stepping stone to reunite the ummah, and he believed that his generation was to establish the liberation required for us next generation to consider how to re-establish that unified leadership. It's a hard process, and that's why I think that when the ummah talks about these issues, with great pain and great difficulty, sometimes I believe, and I may be wrong in this, sometimes I believe that what the ummah is complaining about more is not the inability to revive unified leadership. That's possible through struggle. What the ummah dislikes is that it requires struggle to implement it. What the ummah dislikes is it can't be done in comfort. What the ummah dislikes is it doesn't like the idea that there has to be a real sacrifice in order to push through. The same way the Bosnians sacrificed, the same way the Turks have sacrificed, the same way the Uzbeks have sacrificed, the same way. That's what goes back to the hadith. Because when you look at the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, when he talks about the idea of the Muslims will be many, but you'll be like the foam of the sea. Note the hadith doesn't use the word weakness. The Prophet ﷺ says that one day Allah will remove the fear in the hearts of your enemies and they will come about you as if at a feast. And the Sahaba, they're asking, will it be because we are weak or strong? They say, will we be many on that day or will we be few? Will we be strong or will we be weak? And Prophet ﷺ says, you will be many but like the foam of the sea. He hasn't used the word weak yet. But look why he says we'll be like the foam of the sea. It's not because we're weak. It's not because we lack power. It's not because we lack the tools. It's not because we lack the means. He will say it is because your hearts will be afflicted with wahan, a love of comfort, a love of the dunya, and they distaste, a dislike for death. Death here meaning you will dislike struggle. You will dislike sacrifice, meaning you will dislike the process necessary to manifest your power. You will dislike the process necessary to achieve the glory. You will want to achieve it through comfort, not through struggle. That's why when you're asking about Trump and Biden, when people said Trump will be worse, that's why I said the next 4 years are going to be years of struggle. Do you want to struggle through comfort or in dignity or in humiliation? What the American is really asking is, Trump is not going to come and knock on the door and hand it over to a white supremacist. Trump is not going to deploy the National Guard to commit a genocide of Americans. Trump is not going to do to the American citizen what Israel has done to the Palestinians. So when the American Muslim says that Trump is going to be worse for me, what do they mean when say Trump is going to be worse? I'm not defending Trump here. I'm saying it's true Trump might put the Muslim ban. Trump will cause censorship on the campuses the way Biden is doing with regards to Israel and the like. But Trump won't do anything remotely similar to what Israel is doing to Palestine, suggesting the real reason that Americans fear Trump or don't like the idea of punishing Biden because Trump might come is because they're aware there's a struggle coming and they believe there is more comfort in letting Biden win than to struggle through Trump. That's the point. The Ummah is not weak. The Ummah just has a dislike for struggle, or some parts of the Ummah, because the Bosnians are still struggling. And that's why I always tell people that if you want to connect with the Ummah, go to Bosnia, go and see them. Go and see how despite 200, 300 years of attempts to erase Islam from the heart of Europe, it's still there with the minarets, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. Go there and I dare you to tell them that they're weak. And that's the point I want to say is that people talk about the next 100 years. I think that when I look at the situation of the Ummah today, the colonizers failed to capitalize. They tried to maintain the colonization. They couldn't. Caliphate fell. Colonization was kicked out in 1950s, 1960s. And then we entered a debate. How do we establish unified Muslim leadership? There were attempts here and there. OIC, that people deride these organizations and say they are useless. But ask yourself why they were established. They weren't established for no reason. They were established with an intention in mind to help to reunify. I'm not saying that process is the right process. I'm saying don't talk as if there are attempts are not being made. Rather, go and identify how each community is struggling in its own regards and then ask how you can unite those efforts. I spoke with, he won't mind me mentioning his name, Chris Abdurrahman from LaunchGood. He told me a very interesting statistic. He showed me a list and he said to me the top 5 populations in the world. He said number 1 is Muslims, 2 billion. Number 2, China, 1.5 billion. Number 3, India, 1 billion. Number 4, US, 360 million. And he said number 5, English-speaking Muslims, 330 million. Largest population. It shows you why we were able to influence the narrative so much in the West. Now, those English-speaking populations are in America, Europe, Middle East, India, the Indian subcontinent, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, these places. So across the whole world, you now have these English-speaking Muslims who are influencing Western rhetoric and who are influencing the narratives and who are making a difference with regards to Gaza or the like. Why? Because everybody is able to act in unison of it. And that's why I argue that if caliphate is the form, and the scholars have said that the substance of the people will create that form, I'm more focused on the substance of the people, not in terms of how people commonly use it, which is focused on your ibadah. Because when people say focus on your ibadah, they imply ibadah only means the salat and the tahajjud. Ibadah is every action of a Muslim that's done in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I do this podcast hoping to influence the narrative in America, this is ibadah. I believe I get hasanat for it. If I go and get on a plane and go to America, for example, to tell them, yeah, ibadallah, let's move. Every second I'm on the plane, I believe I get hasanat for it. Every second on the plane. I believe that the train getting on from Stonebridge Park Station to come to Bank Station, every second I'm getting hasanat. Why? The intention, inshallah, only Allah knows my heart. Inshallah, every intention is for Allah. That's ibadah. We have twisted the meanings of what the Prophet ﷺ came in. When we talk about ibadah, people think about it in one way, but not the other way. And that's why I think that sometimes, and I finish on this particular point, when we're talking about the next 100 years, I believe that if the ummah wants to restore its glory, go out and reconnect the limbs of the body of this ummah that were ripped apart psychologically by the colonizers. Go out and connect the hand of Bosnia. Go out and reconnect the hand of Uzbekistan. Go out and reconnect the hand of Ghana, the arm of Ghana. Go out and reconnect Senegal. Go out and reconnect South Africa. Go out and reconnect Malaysia. Go out and reconnect Indonesia. Let those memories be poured into you until suddenly you see the ummah for what it is, not what you think it is. That you see the ummah for the strength it has, not for the weakness you think it has. That you go out and you see them, and then you will see opportunities that you did not think exist before. Why? You will see that you might be in America, but you can hold a conference in Istanbul and then bring those from Malaysia, and then you can go to Indonesia, and then you can go to Ghana, and you can bridge all these organizations together in a world of social media where we amplify each other's voices and stories and identities, and that creates an environment for new initiatives that allow us to manifest the Muslim power that you so desperately crave. But the point that I'm saying is this, and this is the summary I want to put. Do not say the ummah is weak. If you say it's weak, you are the one who is weak. And that's why Prophet ﷺ said that the one who says the ummah is ruined, he is the one who is ruined, because the ummah always has strength. The question is, if you believe yourself to be weak, go out and find that strength. And that's why I argued, and this is why we started the travel business in the first place. My wife used to say to me that when people ask you what books do you read, you spend 20% of the conversation on the books, 80% on the experiences you had in Bosnia, Ghana, Nigeria, these places as well. Why don't we do something where we can recreate those experiences where you connect? Because when you connect, you realize the ummah is actually still magnificent. It's still beautiful. There's so much good in it. There's so much khair in it. And I always think that if you focus on those positive things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has delivered, Allah will be positive in your mind and deliver those positive results. And I think there's a difference between weakness and struggle. To struggle to feel that weight, and we feel it. You talk about Gaza, like you wake up, it's hard to sleep watching that genocide. I haven't felt good since that genocide has happened. It's hard, like, just to keep going until people keep moving, until people keep mobilizing. I tell them, not because I believe that they can stop the genocide, but because they're making a difference and they're making it complicated. I don't know what the outcome looks like, but I know we have to do something. I don't know what the outcome looks like, but I know we're making a difference. I don't know what the outcome looks like, but I know they're trying to shadow ban accounts because they're frustrated about something. I don't know what the outcome looks like, but I know they're spending millions on narratives on social media that because they're worried that their monopoly on the narrative has been broken by us for free. I know that Biden is worried in the election because of the Muslim vote. I know that Starmer is worried about the election because of Gaza and the impact of the Muslims. I know that they're worried about it. I don't know what the outcome will look like, but I know that given they're worried about it, it means there's a power there that we have that we need to appreciate and therefore mobilize and use it and capitalize on it. That's what I'm telling people. Use the powers that you have and leave the outcome to Allah. You ask me, what do the next 100 years look like? I don't know, but I can tell you that a people of substance, a people who stand for justice, a people who strive, a people who move, a people who mobilize, a people who choose not to sit at home but rather to go out, a people who say, listen, I'm ready to struggle, I'm ready to strive, I'm ready to feel that pressure, I'm ready to take risks in this. Though a people like that will create a system far greater than any system that you read in the past, because Allah has promised it. Allah says that فَأُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ سَعْيُهُمْ مَشْكُورًا. Allah rewards the striving of those who achieve. And that's why I argue that at the end of the day, and I always say it, I say, Ya ibadallah, at the end of the day, it's about your perspective or what your goal is in this dunya. You asked about the next 100 years. I don't know if I want to see the next 100 years. Not because I think it will be bleak, but because for me, it's irrelevant about what happens in the next 100 years. The question I ask myself is, what can I do now within the powers that Allah has given? But for what reason? Not because of a reason in this dunya. This dunya belongs to Allah. Allah will decide what He wants to do with it. Allah decided to destroy Hud's people, but decided to reward Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's people. Allah decided to destroy Lut's people, but decided to guide Yunus alayhi salam's people, even though Yunus left them and abandoned them and went into the whale, and he came back, he found his people guided. Allah is going to do with this dunya what he decides to do. I'm not asking the question of what I think Allah should do with this dunya. I'm asking the question, Allah has already decided the outcome. Where can I position myself as a vehicle? Allah gave me a voice to use something, I will use that voice. Ya Allah, what else can I do? If I have finances, let me use the finances. If I can liaise with somebody, go and liaise with somebody. Can I take people out to go rediscover the memories of the ummah? Yalla, take people to... What else can I do? What else can I do? Why? Because on the day of judgment, I will not be asked about the next 100 years. I will be told, Allah gave you the ability to speak. What did you say? Allah gave you the ability to spend. What did you spend on? Allah gave you the ability to think. What did you do with it? Allah gave you this power to do this. What did you do with it? Allah gave you the ability to make change even on the small level, because Allah said, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى. Those who do even an atom of good deed, Allah sees it. Allah will say, show me the atoms of deeds that you did based on the powers that you have, because I know, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, if we ever enter Jannat al-Firdaus, we're hardly likely to ask about this dunya, but rather we will celebrate that no matter how bleak the situation looked, we moved. No matter how bleak the situation looked, we mobilized. No matter how bleak or how powerful the system looked, we still challenged it. No matter when people told us there's no point, we kept going. No matter how many people said there's despair, there's no hope, we were heartbroken, but we kept moving. That ummah that does that is an ummah that will achieve extraordinary things, even if it doesn't appreciate it. Because when I read the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet went through persecution for the first 13 years of his life, in the first 13 years of the da'wah. Victory in Badr, defeat in Uhud, existential crisis in Khandaq, Treaty of Hudaybiyah that Umar al-Khattab believed to be a humiliation. And then the next year he was given Fatah Mecca. But even Fatah Mecca, he didn't see Quds liberated. But he went back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that was sufficient for him to go down as the greatest man to have lived in history. Why? Because he's not measured only by his material gains. He's measured by the spirit that he gave and imbued within this ummah that says never give up and keep moving. It's the spirit that meant France colonized Algeria 132 years, and still after 132 years when the Algerians liberated, they didn't chant, we kicked out the French, congratulate the Algerian state. They said, Ya Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya Muhammad mabruk alik. Oh Prophet Muhammad, congratulations. 132 years of struggle and we returned Algeria to you. That's the spirit of the heart that never dies. That's the spirit that keeps the ummah alive. That's the spirit that allows the ummah to achieve glory. So for me, I don't measure the 100 years by outcome. I measure it by the spirit of the ummah. Is this ummah going to maintain this spirit of moving, of mobilizing, of getting back up after every mistake and changing? Or is it an ummah that's going to just wait for something to happen? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in charge of the outcome. And I believe, I don't know what will happen in Gaza. I don't know what would happen in the next 100 years, but I am proud of an ummah that moved. I'm proud of an ummah that changed the narrative on Gaza. I'm proud of an ummah that has Biden worrying about his election chances. I'm proud of an ummah that has made Keir Starmer worrying about his chances as well. I'm proud of an ummah that keeps talking even though they are heartbroken. I'm proud of an ummah that keeps mobilizing even though their heart might be filled with despair. I'm proud of an ummah that is beginning to see its power. I'm proud of an ummah that Netanyahu is spending millions on to try to silence. I'm proud of an ummah that made Blinken change his travel plans to go to leaders in order to try. I'm proud of an ummah in Pakistan where, despite the machinations of an establishment in order to try to maintain its power and to rig elections, still they managed to deliver independent candidates and break the rigging of the establishment and send the whole Pakistan in turmoil. I'm proud that the ummah is still alive. Never talk about the ummah like it's dead. Don't talk about the ummah like it's weak. We're going through a turbulent process. We're going through a struggle, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of everything. Our choice or our decision is not about what the outcome should be. Our decision is about what powers do we have and how can we use those powers, however minuscule they might be. For wallahi, the first of a rain is always a droplet. That drop is what leads to that rain that gives life to the land after it's appeared arid and have nothing on it. It's that first drop of rain that we're looking for. And as long as we keep moving, in my opinion, there's always something to be optimistic for in this ummah. Optimistic in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not necessarily in the outcome. Optimistic that Allah is in control, acknowledging Allah is in control, and acknowledging that at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is that when our soul leaves our body, we have something with which to look at the Prophet ﷺ, say, Ya Rasulullah, I left the dunya in a dire state, but Ya Rasulullah, I was not one of those people who sat at home and did nothing. And certainly I was not one of those people who used to look at Jalal mobilizing or thinking Muslim and tell him, what's the point of these efforts that you're doing? I was not one of those, Ya Rasulullah. I was one of those who kept moving, mobilizing and telling people, go, go, go. They told me the whole world is against you and the system is against you. But I told them, if the whole system is against me, Allah is sufficient for me. And I mobilize against that. And Ya Rasulullah, here I am with the greatest victory in Firdaus, sitting next to you. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. With the Sahaba as my neighbors, alhamdulillah. With Muhammad Jalil, inshallah, next to me, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And this is the greatest victory. And that's why the Muslim is always an optimist. This is where I finish. That's why the Muslim is always an optimist. Because even in the darkest moments, the Muslim believes change is always possible, because change is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't ask yourself what the outcome should be. Ask yourself what you can do to be the vehicle to achieve that outcome. And you will find that the opportunity you can't see is just around the corner, because Allah monopolized the outcome for himself. All he asks from us is move, and Allah will deliver the outcome. May the ummah keep moving, inshallah.
Ameen. Sami Hamdi. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for your time too.
Barakallah.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkinmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.